Welcome to this, the final of our 4 training sessions planned to help you get the high into and from the high holidays. And I'm delighted that this evening we have, at great distance from each other, but adjacent to each other on screen, Rabbi Larry Hoffman from New York joining us this evening to bring us his experience, having not so much written the book, but edited the series of books on the high holidays, and bringing his experience that he's already been sharing with rabbinic and cantorial colleagues in North America to us as well in the United Kingdom and elsewhere in Europe as well. And as you've already had the delight of hearing Cantor Sarah Grabiner, she will be providing a second voice and a different perspective of someone serving in a progressive community in this country, Radlett Reform Synagogue, who can talk to us something of how things are being applied. So it's my delight as Rabbi Richard Jacobi and a leader of a liberal community in East London and Essex to host this evening. We're going to turn to Larry in just a moment so that he can begin teaching us from his experience. And as he starts, I will share his agenda with you in the chat. As he is teaching, and then as Sarah is responding and giving some of her teaching, they will take about the first half an hour in this session from now, and then we'll be coming to everybody's questions. If they are questions that are pertinent to that moment, ask them in the chat, and I will, if I believe they need to be, I will intervene and ask them on your behalf. Otherwise, I'll look to store up the questions so that I can see what themes are emerging. So please do write into the chat if you can with your questions. You will also have seen in the top corner of your screen that we are recording this as we have been recording each session. And the reason is there are a number of people who have not been able to join us this evening, but who would like to be able to partake of the session. If you are not one of those people who would like to be seen during the course of the evening, then this is also a warning to you to turn off your own camera so that you can't be seen. And again, to use the chat to participate so that we're not outing you in public without you wishing to be outed. So I think that's enough from me. I'm going to turn to Larry, who is a teacher, and I'm lucky enough to call him both colleague and friend, to teach you for about the next 20 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I am honored to be here, more honored than I can say, really. I have always enjoyed my time in the UK. I see some faces on the screen who are familiar to me. I feel as if I'm an honorary citizen of at least the UK congregations, if not the country. To be now working with Richard Jacobi, who's my esteemed colleague and friend, and with Sarah Grabiner, who is a gifted cantor. I hated to graduate her as a cantor because that meant she would leave us here and go back to you. But at least we get to work together across the miles. My role is actually conceptual because I cannot do what you do. If you lead services, you know your community much better than I do. That's true here in America, and it's all the more so true in the UK. So all I can do is kind of help you do it. The agenda has gone up on the chat, and you can look at it on occasion. You'll see that there are 6 things that I'm going to be handling today. But in order to do it, I'm going to talk very, very quickly. And so I suggest that you don't even try to take notes. You'll be able to recollect this because you can go back on and look at it for 20 minutes of my talk, certainly. If you try to take notes, you'll never catch up with me. My students tell me that all the time. And I'm even going to talk faster than I normally do because I do want to cover everything that you need to know or that I think I want to tell you within the 20-minute limit. So just sort of focus on what we're doing, let it slide through you and pass over you and run around you and kind of sit in it for a bit, maybe make some notes about things that you have on your mind about it. I want to talk about, first of all, my topic, which is really how to think differently about liturgy in a time of a global pandemic. I mean, ask the question. The question is, what are we doing anyway? You see, we get so busy doing worship that we never even think about what it is. It's just something we do. And it doesn't occur to us even, what's the point of it all? We just do it, forget what it is. It's like a parent who reads bedtime stories to her daughter every single night to alleviate her anxieties before she goes to sleep. And one day her daughter says to her, "But Mom, I really do need your help, you know. I'm still very anxious at bedtime. So much going on in my head, but please, no more stories. I'm 17 years old already." Maybe we could like just talk about things for a change. So, you know, it's time for us to think, what are we really doing? That's the main issue. So what are we doing in our worship? I mean, what's the point of it all? If you're Orthodox, and the point simply is to do it. You've got the halacha and you simply do it. But if you're not Orthodox, well, then what actually are we doing? So I want to start by thinking through with you, what is religion, Judaism in our case, and then what is worship? I'm going to say that religion is the ongoing search to do justice to the human condition. Worship is the artistic way we raise consciousness of the human condition and how we respond to it. High holiday worship then raises consciousness of the human condition at its very deepest level, the level of life and death and purpose and progress, hope and aspiration to carry us through the rest of the year. Liturgy is just a script for worship. What really matters is worship. Liturgy is an open script, that is. It requires interpretation and choice and how we do it, direction. If you are leading worship, then you are the producer and director of the grand drama of the Jewish people, the script that's been written through time and that we still add to and interpret it. Your question is, how do you convert this script of worship, of liturgy, into the proper worship for this particular challenging year? The question for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur always should be, are we addressing the human condition in which we find ourselves, or are we just by rote going through some book that somebody handed to you and you handed to somebody else, your congregants, and someday you'll put away just in 10 days after we start? Well, obviously you want to handle the human condition, and particularly now, because most people don't think about it on the average year, they just show up. But nothing could be farther from our situation than that. Every single day we are mired in the human condition, wondering what will be with our lives. I need not tell you that. So we need to speak to the human condition, or people will rightly conclude that we are irrelevant. So what prevents our making the right choices? We're at the part of the agenda number 2. What goes wrong? And what goes wrong is something called extension transference. It's a term that I got from an anthropologist whose name is Edward Hall. Hall says, culture and technology are extensions of the human reach to better satisfy our human needs. We constantly reach out into the world and then deposit pieces of culture and technology as a means of expanding our reach and expanding how then we serve the human condition. Freud, who draws on Freud, talks about transference. You know that. Transference is the way that you treat your therapist like your mother or father, say, and you mistake one for the other. You take your primary allegiance to your parents and you ditch it onto the therapist. So extension transference is the way we transfer our primary allegiance, not to what we really need, but rather to the extensions of ourselves. And the excess example is food. We need to eat, right? So we develop recipes, right? That's the first order of extension. Now we got a bunch of recipes out there, which we follow even if we don't like the food. The worst thing we do is our grandmother handed down her wonderful book of recipes. And so now we say we got to remain loyal to that. Now, it may turn out that her grandma's cookbook comes with chicken fat and humongous dollops of sugar. But we want to remain loyal to that extension, right? We got to do what the book says. Well, obviously we don't. And we know better than that when it comes to cooking. So why don't we know better than that when it comes to our prayer book? The prayer book is like grandma's cookbook. Why do we simply read every word of it? Why do we treat it as if even the boring part has to be done? It doesn't. So what we have to do then is alter what we do with the book, just the way we would if it were a cookbook. Now, Reformed Jews have always done that. Reformed Jews inherited a machzor in the 19th century. They inherited a machzor of medieval piyutim and requests for restoring the temple cult, which is the liturgical equivalent of chicken fat. And they decided to get rid of it. They simply overcame their extension transference and left all that stuff behind. This year, there's some other stuff we may have to leave behind. Not that there's anything wrong with it, mind you, it just won't work over Zoom. Some of your choir's favorite pieces may be chicken fat this year. It just won't work over Zoom. The same with the masa. You just can't do it all. You may have to do without an Amida this year because it doesn't work very well on Zoom. So decide how much of the book needs to be in it. Decide, above all, what parts of the book and what parts of worship will address the human condition. So now, for the first time, we need to think about seriously cutting things. I want you to know this is not just a reform problem. In preparing my little address today to you, I discovered, for example, that in the 19th and early 20th century, there's a rabbi whose name was the Chafetz Chaim, a very great rabbi indeed, and very, very orthodox. And he said, it's a good thing to shorten the piyutim on Shacharit, on Yom Kippur, in order to hurry through it and get to Musaf. That's the important thing. And make sure you finish that in time to get to Mincha. Now, his concern was try to get all the services in. But note how he says, use your brain. Don't just do everything. Some things deserve no attention and some things deserve a lot. What deserves our attention then this year? That's our question. It's not just a question of what we leave out. It's also what we decide to include and what we decide to add and how we can reorganize the thing as well. The point is, the services anyway are overly long. We should have been doing this already. Most of our people sit through the usual stuff, the Shemanis, blessings, and all the stuff about the Amida and God knows what else, in order to get the high holiday staples. That's what they wait for. And finally they say, oh, Avinu Malkeinu, we got there finally, right? Oh, finally the shofar. How long did I have to wait for this? Or else they say, I'm not going to come until such and such a time. They don't get to Rosh Hashanah till then anyway. Our point is that this year you don't have that luxury. They're not going to sit there and wait. So decide in advance to omit most of the daily core of things that you don't really need this year. Get to the point, the high holiday point about the human condition. As an example, I want you to imagine a service dedicated to the high holiday message of choosing life, which is about perfect for our time, I think you'll say. So here's a prayer we don't normally say, but we could. It's the Rosh Chodesh prayer that we do the week before Rosh Chodesh. Yehi Ratzon, it says. Shetachadesh aleinu et hachodesh hazeh. We can change it. God, renew for us, please, this year, l'tovah u'levracha, v'titein lanu, and give us chayim arukim, long life, life of goodness, of blessing, of sustenance, and so on. It's a magnificent prayer with a great cantorial rendition as well. Why not borrow it and apply it? My example of using other things and bringing them in, not just taking what we don't want and leaving it out. So we want to avoid cultural transference. We want to focus on what really matters. We want to address the human condition during COVID. How do you do that on Zoom? We may understand the new prayers that we add. We may know why we made those choices, but our people won't. We need to think of ourselves not only as the director of the plot of this thing, but also as the person who guides them through it. Consider then at various times introducing the prayers and stitching them together with your own seams. So before you do that prayer I just mentioned, say the cantor is going to do it. So what if you say, how much we yearn for life, O God of life. We pray this month, this year, in the words and music of our ancestors, that you grant us life renewed. Then you read a couple lines of it, and then the cantor sings it. You see how you introduce it? It's a set induction. You give people a way to think about it and say, oh, I understand, that's why it's here. And that's how they listen to it. Now, if you've listened to all of this, you're going to say, but what about the people who want the Amida? I hear you, and that's my caveat, and that's number 3, congregational dynamics. If you think about what a congregation is, you have to realize that it's made of concentric circles. The inner circle is the professionals, the clergy, probably most of you on this call. You're the people who really understand it all. Just beyond that are the people who are your regulars, the people who show up. They come early for the high holidays. They get a good seat. They know what to expect. They're the ones who get the honors and read from the Torah. They're the people who think you are fabulous. They appreciate you. And then there are the other 90% of the congregants who you rarely see the rest of the year. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just not the regulars. Now the point is, we generally play to the 10% because they're the ones who are there on every Shabbat. They're the ones who you know. They're the ones who you can show will show up. And yet, what happens to the 90%? Well, I've been that 90% because I don't have a congregation. So I come and I sit in the back and I watch what they do. Mostly they kind of look around the room and see who's there, and maybe they come a little late and they look thumb through the book and do what they're told or not, until finally they get to the part that they really do appreciate, which is not very much of it. The point is, they won't know the high point. They won't know the usual stuff that you get rid of anyway. They'll be happy with it. But your question is, what about the 10% who might need it? And indeed, you may say they're the ones who want dafka, the usual thing now in this time of COVID, and our lives are upset, and maybe so. In which case you might have to consider the possibility of having 2 different tracks. Having a service for an hour for everybody, playing to the 90%, because the 10% will get a lot out of that too. But also allowing time for people on their own to say an Amida at home and then rejoin you for a second service later, something like that. I will leave you for the track to the regulars because that's the usual liturgy. And my topic is what to do with this hour and a quarter or whatever it is you have for a service. How you can focus on meaning for our time, how you can speak to what the 10% need, and what the 90% will finally get as well. Treat the marginals, this 90%, as the Jewishly culturally deprived. They're like the Seder child who doesn't even know what to ask. But you know what? They feel the pinch of the human condition this year like everyone else, and they'll be waiting for something, and they need it from you. And yes, what? This is your first chance, your big chance to play to everybody. Everywhere I go, people tell me that Zoom draws in all sorts of people from all over. You must get hundreds of people whose names you don't know, and you don't know who they are, and they come from all over. Especially this is important in the UK, where so many people in your country, so many people are nominally Orthodox because I think that's the real thing. And they might, however, visit you this year, and they can discover that you're the real thing. For once, they will find Judaism speaks to them. And I predict if you do it right, when finally you're back in your shuls, they will say, you know, I'm going to try out that shul. That was a wonderful time. They really talked to me in these high holy days when I needed it most. So how do you do that? I've already discussed it, but now I want to look at number 4, little more detail, liturgy as drama. We address the human condition in 2 ways. One way is symbolic and it's subliminal, and largely music does that. In addition, the prayers that everybody recognizes whether they know what they mean or not, Kol Nidre. If they knew what it meant, they wouldn't say it. But it's necessary. You expect it on Yom Kippur. So the old standbys, the stuff they want, and the music they anticipate, That's the symbolic way of talking to them. In addition, though, there's a cognitive message, and I want to focus for a moment on how you get across the cognitive message. You're going to treat the liturgy, as I said, not as a book, but as a script to the great drama of the Jewish people. Now, drama allows for many interpretations. You know that. So, for example, just think of how Hamlet has been interpreted to mean different things over the years. Directors decide in advance what message they want to give the audience. High holiday services are like our Hamlet. It's our Jewish Shakespeare. There's a difference, of course. Hamlet is short and manageable as a script. The Machzor is massive and unmanageable. Hamlet is a closed script, therefore, not much you can do with it. Our Machzor is a massive open script. You can be selective about it. You're the director. Ask yourself regularly, what message will people take away from what you do this year? They will get it symbolically, subliminally through the music and the regular stuff that they get every Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, but they will also get it from how you choose what you choose, how you lace together the prayers, in my example that I gave before with the Rosh Chodesh prayer, and from your sermon. But instead of having a long sermon, which you can't afford this year, you'll have little pieces of sermonette. There'll be a theme, and all the music and the prayers and the sermonette in pieces will all come together in a message with one central sermonette, perhaps expanding on it in the middle. I want to give you an example. Okay. Imagine this service that I talked about before on life. So let's expand on that for a minute. What if you started with the Rosh Hashanah theme song, you know, da, 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 right? But wait till the ending, and then make sure that your cantors, in the ending, it doesn't go da, 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 and it goes da, 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 and you say to people, that's the equivalent of Beethoven's Ninth. That's the Jewish cry for joy and for the promise of life eternal. Now you have that sort of sermonic introduction. After they hear it, then you have the sermonic discussion of it very quickly, and you say, oh, that's what it is. I never thought of it that way. What if you jump to the Shema now? You need a Shema. They can't do without that. But then I jump to Hashkivenu. Because Hashkivenu has that wonderful line, God, Hashkivenu l'shalom, Hamidenu l'chaim. There's your theme. And so now comes your sermonic accompaniment. You say, God, lie us down in peace, raise us up tomorrow for life, life affirmed, life renewed, l'chaim, to life, and then comes the song. Notice you don't go into professorial mode. It's all prayerful, the whole thing. You give them the set induction in a prayerful way, and they nod and they say yes, and now they listen to the music differently than they would. And that's important because they're going to listen this year. They cannot sing along. Now, what if you have a sermonic aside on the Rosh Chodesh prayer that we talked about? Or what if you then went to Zachrenu? Don't have the whole Amidah, but Zachrenu l'chaim, that's where it certainly works. And then maybe your sermon, and then Birkat Shalom. Again, with the addition, yes, God. Right at the end, you say, yes, God, raise us up not just to life, but to peace. Life, peace, promise. Sermonically, you weave the entire thing together. And maybe Avinu Malkeinu at the end, and a Kaddish, which you need. And then a closing song on life. And guess what? One of the things you can do this year is I will talk about it a little later when I discuss technology. The technology of Zoom is terrible, but there's some good things about it. It allows you to convert home into shul. Home and shul come together. Before, people had to rush the services and rush home. They don't do that anymore. Now you can have them have apples and honey right next to them. And imagine you finish with apples and honey. And together you all eat apples and honey together. So you can bring the two modes of being Jewish, home and synagogue, together this year. Imagine for a second example, I'll give you one more example. Imagine a service on universalism, on the Jewish demand that we Jews are a particular people with a universalistic message who care about the world. What could be more appropriate than that? A pandemic is threatening our world. That's the human condition. Worldwide, however, we see a collaboration of scientists. Look how we know we depend on one another worldwide. And guess what? We have a religion that cares about the world, not just about ourselves. People don't know that because we hide it in a service where we never accent anything. But what if that became the theme of the morning? Think of it, Hayom Harat Olam, this is the world's rebirth. The Gemara likens the shofar to the sound of a woman's cries while she's giving birth, and the Tefillah Gedolah is the last cry as the baby is born. Think of V'ya'atayu, all the world shall come to serve thee. That was written by someone from your country, not mine, right? That's the Zangwill piece. That's all part of Judaism. So imagine a service where you omit the Birchot HaShachar, the Pesukei, the Zimra. You don't need it. Instead, you start with some discussion of, so first of all, some melody, a song, right? And then you talk for briefly about the human condition in a time of COVID, as I mentioned it. And then what if your theme was Aleinu? And you sing the regular Aleinu, or you listen to it, and then you say, yes, but there's a great Aleinu for this period of time. And all of a sudden they listen to it and they compare it. And you talk about the regular Aleinus for regular days, but the great Aleinu is the grandeur of this day and the hope of the world renewed. You skip to the Shema, you don't need an Amida. Maybe the center of the service is the Unatana Tokef. Maybe not all of it, and maybe not your usual choir piece. But in any case, you want to emphasize the end words, Shemenu Karata Vishmecha. You called us by your name, O God. We are part of you, all of us. Kol Bai Olam, everybody who enters the world stands before God this year. I wouldn't read the Akedah this year. Who needs another Akedah? Read Genesis, the creation of the world as an alternative. It's a new year, a new beginning. Then a sermon maybe on being made in God's image, and the shofar, not all of it maybe, but certainly accent the Malchuyot, God of all the world, Avinu Malkeinu. I'd even end with the regular Aleinu as a reprise perhaps, and a final benediction. Don't forget the benediction. I'm almost done, but look at my last 2 points really briefly. First of all, technological concerns. I've already talked about how you can blend home and shul. But I want to now add something about what goes wrong with Zoom. Something about shul is that everybody dresses up for it, and there's kind of a feel about it. It's called the ambience. The ambience of people sitting in a schlumpy way on their sofa watching what you do with maybe some drink in hand is certainly not what you need for the high holidays. And it'll ruin the high holidays entirely. So I would say, if you can, tell people they should dress for the occasion. Suggest they find a different place for their computer, and tell them they should have flowers on hand. And when you start the service, everybody lifts the flowers, and you say the bracha, right? Baruch atah Adonai shekacha lo ba'olamo. And they all look at the flowers. Tell them to smell the flowers, and you'll see the smile on their faces. Then you start the singing. Have people then make their home as if it's a sacred place for the occasion. It'll change everything. Similarly, you can use the home for a blessing of children. Look what you can do differently. What if you had a service just for the blessing of children, those who have children? And now it's Yom Kippur, and just before they eat, an early service, or just after they eat, perhaps. And they all get on with their children, and you teach them how to do the blessing, and they all do it and watch each other doing it on the screen. See, you can use the technology wisely as well. Last, game and spectacle. Well, I've already kind of hinted at that. The game is what you have in the prayer book. The spectacle is the stuff that goes on all the time beside it, and we don't give any thought to the spectacle, but we should, because it matters just as much. So when you're limited to being at home, the spectacle's gone, and that's why you need to attend to the spectacle. You need to attend to the flowers. You need to attend to how people dress. You need to do extra things. But one of the things about ritual is, think of ritual like a curve. What happens in shul is the game, the actual prayer service is the top of it. But there's a lead up to it, and then it trails away. You can expand the two ends of the curve. You don't have to wait for Rosh Hashanah to start Rosh Hashanah. I would use the Sheva de Nechemta, the 7 Haftarah readings that lead up to Rosh Hashanah, which are from Isaiah, and which are gorgeous. And it's a dialogue between God and Israel about, will we ever get out of this mess you put us into, God? We're in exile. And God says, yes, I will save you. Have comfort. They say, I don't know. We're a ship on the ocean about to go under. God says, hey, it's me, God talking. You'll see this dialogue back and forth. I would have that every week for 7 weeks. That would be my Friday night service, maybe. And I would have people see the lead up to it. Afterwards, too, 10 days of repentance. Don't waste them. Tell people they should come online every night. You're going to give them one blessing for the evening they can share with the rest of their family. Take a blessing like Kachalo Ba'olamo or something about the covenant from Noah. And they should say the blessing and then talk at dinner about how the blessing fills in their lives. You get the idea. Don't just use the game part, expand it and use all the time that's available to you. Well, there's so much more I could say, and I rushed through this. I know I did. I think I may have gone over time. I am so sorry. But I want you to know if I could be, I would be there in person with you. And I would give each of you a hug, and I hope someday I'll be able to do that and meet you and then meet you personally. In the meantime, however, I wish you only God's blessing and chazak, chazak, as you make these services so memorable. And by the way, if you know what you're doing and you attend to the way to do it, this is what I want to do. This is the message. You will actually enjoy the preparation as well. Thank you very much.
Larry, thank you so much. And having heard that the Machzor is the liturgical equivalent of chicken fat, I can now add that to my list of things that I would never have expected to come up in 2020. To respond further to Larry's inspiring thoughts and for some of us controversial thinking, for some of us exciting thinking, I'm going to hand straight over to Cantor Sarah Grabina.
Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you, Larry, so much. I'm energized every time we speak. I want to keep this brief because I really want to ensure that we have time for everybody to have questions. It's so much to digest. So do please be thinking about what Larry said and put those questions there in the chat, or you can send them to Richard, Jacoby directly. He'll kind of moderate that for us. I just want to really highlight what I'm taking away from this as somebody who's in the trenches here in the UK, doing the work. We're thinking about this right now. How are we going to actualize this wonderful, inspiring notion which Larry gives us, that there is so much opportunity this year. And there's a lot of loss as well. There's a lot of sadness, and there are things which are tough that we don't get, and that's really difficult. But there's also opportunity, and we need to be able to focus on both of those. So the first thing that I really take away is this notion of message. Stay on message. We don't have the luxury of having a captive audience in our shuls. If somebody is sitting at home and is not interested, I'm concerned that they'll just switch us off, and that's sad. That's a deep sorrow for me as somebody who devotes my time and energy, like so many of you do, to this. So think about beforehand, what is your message? I love Larry's use of Hamlet as a metaphor. If you go to see a Shakespeare play, you don't assume they're going to emphasize every single line every time you see it. That would be way too unwieldy. We often now don't even expect them to say every line. We expect to see some kind of abbreviation. We expect the director to have decided what they're going to emphasize. Well, that's our role this year, and all the more so, because our Machzor is at least the size of the Shakespeare canon, if not more in depth and nuance. So yes, we'll leave things out, and we need to feel free to do that. We need to feel freed of some of those constraints, because as we keep hearing, this is an unprecedented time. What do we need this year? What message does your community need this year? In that thinking about need, I'm really struck by all the different media which Larry invoked, not just Zoom and screen media, but different senses. what might you need to create that moment? So for example, if the key moment is all about life, and that's the message you want to convey, what does your community need? What tune of Zochreinu gets your people right there? Is it Zochreinu Lechaim? Maybe it's a different melody. What melody really tugs at their heartstrings? Is there one member of your community who always sings that particular B'Sefer Chaim or Mechalkel Chaim B'Chesed? They always sing that Lewandowski solo. Mechalkel. So for people, hearing their voice and seeing their face might be what the moment needs. That's important. Maybe what the moment needs is a certain reading. I know we've got both Reform and Liberal members here, but for a lot of us in the Reform movement, that piece of Kafka in our High Holy Day Machzor, where are you going away from here? I can almost hear the rabbis of my childhood reading it. So maybe make sure you include that one really important reading that says High Holy Days for your congregation. Think about, what moment am I trying to create? And then what does this moment require? Is it a person, a tune, a conversation, a setup, an image? We're going to have to find ways to do those things differently this year, but we can still attend to what the moment and the message need, and we can try to create those things for ourselves and for our community. That is really how I believe we will celebrate, we will contemplate, and we will bring in the new year together in a way altogether different and yet altogether the same, as we always have done. So I think I'll pause there because I know that there are questions and I want to ensure that we really have time to hear more reflections. And so, Richard, I'll hand over to you to moderate our questions.
Thank you, Sarah, for bringing it so much into our own synagogue communities, whether we're Reform, Liberal or Independent, wherever we are. So we have a few questions already asked, one of which I guarantee we will get to, but is relating to Simchat Torah. So perhaps we'll come to that one in a couple of minutes. But the first question asked by someone I'm vaguely acquainted with, Margaret Jacoby, is one to do with the leader and what are the pros and cons of leading services from home versus the rabbi or the cantor being the Jewish professional in the synagogue when no one else is there. So I just wonder if either of you would like to comment. Larry, perhaps first, if I come to you, and Sarah, you might want to reflect on some of the discussions you've had with your team at Radlett. Larry.
I actually think Sarah will know better than I, and so will you, Richard. You've had experience with both. I only can speak theoretically. People do appreciate the look of the synagogue. I mean, that's for sure. And obviously, to be able to have that is I think, very significant. On the other hand, we may not be able to do that. And you may feel that's just unsafe for you. And the most important thing is your safety and your feeling comfort. And people will have to understand that, and I'm sure they will. If you do it from home, there are ways to have a backdrop behind you. I mean, you can always arrange, the Zoom backdrop behind you so it looks like the synagogue. And if you do that, that's, I think, almost as good anyway. So I think it's a question of what's safe, where do you feel most comfort? You need to be able to do it well. And so in order to do it well, will you be able to do it well from home? That's the question. Will you be able to do it well if you know you're taking your life in your hands going to the synagogue? It depends on what the situation is. So I don't know a final answer for that. I think that my preference would be in the synagogue. Second best would be with a backdrop from the synagogue. But you have to be comfortable yourself to be able to give your best to it. It is so hard to do something. I don't think congregants have a clue how difficult this is. It's how hard this is to do a Zoom service. So you need to be at your best.
Yeah, I'd love to just add, because there's some things actually I'm going to just bring up that I think the key tension that we're playing with, which is the value of seeing the space versus all of us being in the same boat. And I think that's also a key kind of tension to balance. Larry mentioned you need to do it where you can do it well. I know, for example, my laptop has got a better camera and sound equipment than the sound equipment in my shul. So I know sometimes that actually what we do best has lots of different meanings. I'm going to quote something that I heard Larry saying recently, even though he's here, which is to use Zoom for what it's good at and not for what it's not good at. And I think that's a really important message. We gain a lot by Zoom. We get to see each other's homes. There's an intimacy of really seeing one another's faces in a way that we don't usually get to. So we might have to give up on certain things like the majesty of our buildings to use Zoom for what it's good at this year, which might be more of an intimate connection.
Ironically, with people wearing masks, the only time you get to see anyone's face is now on Zoom. So,
thank you both, and thanks also to Alex Wright, who added into the chat the comment that when the rabbi or shliach or shlichat tzibur is at home, it does feel like a level playing field between congregants and rabbis and cantors, and that then means that also other lay leaders or readers in the service are also on that part of that level playing field. So important reflection of the synagogue's values and what is important to you in all that.
I agree. Thank you for that addition.
The second Rosh Hashanah related question, which a couple of people have asked, is the shofar calls. The difficulty of reading out the calls and then the Baal or Baalat Tekiah blowing the calls with time delays and Zoom delays and sound. Should that be pre-recorded? Does that invalidate it? Does that take away something? What thoughts about how to make the shofar work? Going back to that quote in terms of what Zoom is good at, how's the shofar service going to work in Zoom?
Sarah, you want to start this one?
Well, I think, again, I would go back to that question of what's the moment and what does it need?
Right.
So we want to hear the shofar. Now for your community, as I said, maybe the same person always blows shofar. So maybe it's important that you get to see that face with their shofar. Maybe that means for that person, it needs to be pre-recorded, or maybe they can do it live on Zoom. In your community, maybe lots of people blow shofar. So maybe you want to have everybody in their little Zoom boxes with their shofarot. I think the question is is this, now I'm going to try and remember who I'm quoting. It's not about doing it right. Larry, is this you? Am I quoting you? Yeah, great. Okay, wonderful. It's not about being right. It's about, no, now you need to say it because I'm getting it wrong.
No, you've got it right. It's not about doing it right, because doing it right means you just follow the instructions. It's about doing it well, meaning that you touch people's hearts and souls. So you can do it all right by the halakha and yet not do it well, in which case you've lost all your people. So what's the point? I mean, my answer is yours. I mean, Sarah, we think alike on this. I don't know the answer to that. But the better question is, how do you think it through? So one of the things I suggest is that, first of all, don't put everything on your shoulders. If you're the only clergy person in your synagogue, then you're going to feel like, oh my God, it's all mine. I got to do it right. I got to do it exactly right. But no, you don't have to do it well. And actually, there are experts at doing it well, not just you, but some of your lay people. So have a discussion with your president, or get a Zoom call of 5 people and say, look, I'm thinking about this. What do you think we should do? Get their wisdom and figure it out. There's so many ways. Here in America, one congregation has decided that they're going to do neighborhood shofar all afternoon at different places in the neighborhoods. And people are invited to come out and go to a park where they can be a distance, or in a parking lot somewhere, and they're going to hear the shofar outside, and it'll be a fun afternoon. You pick one time and you go somewhere, and there'll be shofar all over the afternoon. I'm not sure that's how I would choose. They think it's a great idea. Another possibility is that they're going to have like 10 different people with shofars, and they're all going to blow it together in the synagogue, and the camera will kind of show everybody. I'm not sure why, but they think that's a great idea. I think that another one, people are saying they're going to have different people give the call so that there'll be somebody in one home and someone in another home, and it'll be fun to see where they all come from. And there'll be a little time lag, but we'll live with it. I don't think there's any one answer. Try to find something that's fun, that's different. They just say, hey, that's cool, that's cute, I like that. And however it works, it works. And you know what? Not everything's going to work perfectly. Guess what? We're human. It'll be all right.
I want to pick up on one of the questions I've just seen in the chat, because I think it comes in exactly the same category as letting go of being right to do it well. And that's the question of standing and sitting. There are some people who feel very strongly about standing and sitting for different bits of the service. And so they need to be set up appropriately. Because if we all stand up, and we all then all of a sudden just see each other's midriffs, it's not so... it's not so communal. It doesn't feel so enjoyable. And so maybe this is part of Larry's initiative of talking to people ahead of time. Think about what you wear. Think about if you'd like to stand or sit, so that you'll be in a place with your screen where you can stand and sit. Or teach people the text from our Mishnah that if we don't know which direction to face, lechaven et libo, we direct our hearts in the appropriate direction. What do we do with our bodies while we pray? Well, it's what we do with our bodies, and it's also what we do with our intention.
Yeah. So look, in any service, there are always people who can't stand. They're in a wheelchair. They can't get up. And we sort of ignore them, or maybe we say, if you're able, stand. But they still feel like, what am I? I mean, I can't stand. In a way, we are all unable to stand at this moment, because to do so would lose connection or contact with everybody else. This came up actually just recently at our Shabbat table. My wife had Kaddish to say for her mother, and she decided that she would say Kaddish online with the rest of her family. She had her daughters and my son, and they were in different homes. So we had, a number of people. But online, we didn't have exactly a minyan, but okay. But online, she would say the Kaddish, and she'd do it just before Shabbat set in, before we lit candles. So she lit a candle, a Yortzeit lamp, and then she proceeded to talk about her mother. And then she wanted to say Kaddish for it, and we hadn't thought about it. And she said, oh, do I stand? And she started to stand, and it just obviously wasn't the right thing to do, because they wouldn't have seen her and she couldn't have seen them. So it ruined the connection. So I actually would give permission for people to sit. I would say that if they feel like standing, they certainly can. But all of us are in the condition of people that if we stand, we will lose connection with our community, and it's a community that matters most. I think most people will be happy then sitting. If on the other hand, they feel like standing, there's nothing wrong with it. But I think I would give my personal preference, given my experience now, I would give people permission.
Thank you both very much. And it's nice to have mutual teaching going on in the chat room now, if you want to be keeping an eye on that as we're continuing. I don't want to neglect Simchat Torah because it always is the, well, Sukkot maybe more than Simchat Torah is the forgotten part of the Tishri festivals. But a question about the tactile and the very multi-sensory nature and participatory nature of Simchat Torah. And how can we make that not feel like an absolute damp squib this year? And I just wonder if one of you or both of you would like to take that one for a moment, and then we'll come back into the Yamim Noraim for a few moments before we finish. Larry, you going to have first go?
I'll be happy to. You may be disappointed with my response. My response is that, first of all, I haven't thought deeply about Simchat Torah. I'll be happy just to get through Rosh Hashanah and then get to Yom Kippur. But I have thought a bit about it, obviously, because how can you not? More important than what do we do is how do we process the question of what do we do? So let me focus on that. First of all, you process it by bringing other people into the decision. Take it off your shoulders. There's nothing that we have to do only just because we happen to be the clergy. There are other people who have a say in this. So I would involve other people. I would involve small focus groups, perhaps, decide who's involved. Since it has a lot to do with children, I'd involve some of your school parents and say, what do you think we should do? How can we do something at home? Now, if you involve people, they'll come up with more ideas than I can possibly come up with. But again, it goes back to using Zoom for what it does, not what it doesn't do. If we try to do it, if we try to march around, if I tried to march around my room carrying the Torah, it would be the most foolish looking thing in the world. But I can well imagine, for example, delivering, I don't know, I can imagine taking, I'm making this up off the top of my head. I can imagine taking a photo of a big part of the Torah that you know, we unwind and we take a photo of it. And I can imagine delivering that to homes. And if every home had a piece of the Torah, a piece of picture in it, and if the kids at home wound it up, you know, like a scroll. I mean, you could even have more than one if there are more than one kid. And I would have the kids have apples and the usual stuff, you know, and I'd have them hold it aloft. Kids don't mind marching around a room by themselves. You know, I'd maybe let them march around the room or something in home, you know, something like that. It's obvious what we can't do. It's not yet obvious to me what we can do. But I know there are things we can do, and it boils down to taking our homes and making them into the equivalent of something like a sanctuary, which is a Jewish thing to do after all. So what Zoom does allow us to do, it allows us to reach into people's homes and convert homes into a celebrative place for what we do Jewishly. And the second thing is it involves us becoming a group with the people, so that whatever we decide is their decision as well. And then they'll like it and they'll buy into it and they'll be there for it and they will enjoy it because it was their decision.
Thanks, Larry. Is there anything you'd like to add, Sarah?
I think Larry summed up so much of it. I think, again, thinking about what is the message. Maybe this year's Simchat Torah is more about the end and the beginning and the continual cycle. Maybe we emphasize a different aspect of Simchat Torah than we usually emphasize. We're not going to be able to be doing lots of dancing all together and passing the Torah from one person to another. But how can we symbolize that?
I love that. I love that, Sarah. Normally, I tend to take all our holidays and say, what can adults appreciate about them, not just our kids? Because we've tended to make, at least in this country, we've tended to make Judaism into something that's pediatric, you know, anything for the kids, but the adults stay out of it. So I was focusing on the children, but I'm glad you reminded us that there's an adult message to Simchas Torah. So I would definitely do that. But now I'll add the child thing. I mean, here's an example of if we were on Zoom together and talking about, I might say, yes, beginning and ending. What if you took a picture of Devarim at the end and took a picture of Bereshit at the beginning? And since it's actually paper, it's not really a Torah scroll. If there are kids, they get to glue it together. And then you read one and they glue it together, and then you read the second part and they get a tactile message of the adult message. Now you would have something else to say and the third person would add something in and we'd come up with something for sure.
Thank you both very much. And just to add something from my community, we've been having serious consideration about the nature of this year not having individual chatanim or kalot for calling to the Torah, and having groups of particularly the volunteers that have come through to help be a caring community, so that we can be calling them up together and have multiple people coming together. So a number of different ways in which we might want to change to recognize this unique situation.
Yes.
As well. So
thank you, Richard.
Lots of possibilities there.
Exactly.
Rabbi Michael Hilton has just put in the chat, reminding us that Larry suggested, what would it be like if we thought about including the Bereshit text on Rosh Hashanah, and actually that if then we come back to it on Simchat Torah, we're
Beautiful.
really encircling this time in, for example, that message, if that's the message of our season. So I think thinking about the themes that are innate in our tradition and which ones we're really going to shine a light on this year is such an important takeaway.
Thank you. Very lovely.
And I think at a time of such uncertainty, the opportunity to make something of the fragility of Sukkot, the joy of Simchat Torah, and to leave people on that high, looking at how we can create that boost for people, so that they actually not only have focused on, and this might be a year when we actually get almost as many people in for Sukkot and Simchat Torah as we did for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. You never know. And so, you know, that possibility of exciting interest and exciting the multi-sensory at home as well as in synagogue could be very much the opportunity. This year, if you have not normally got one, get someone else who's taking the focus now on making Sukkot and Simchat Torah work in your own community. Otherwise, we'll all be too tired the day after
Yes.
to start make anything work for Sukkot and Simchat Torah. So we're just coming up to 9 o'clock. We anticipated that we were going at least this long, with the possibility of going a few minutes more. And I see someone's desperate that we don't stop. So Larry, you might be here until Rosh Hashanah, okay?
I can't think of a better place to be. That's all right.
We've just seen another lovely comment from David Jewell in Bristol, talking about the message of fragility around Sukkot. And I think the example of life or universalism were just certain examples that Larry was raising. Of course, there's a whole other possible message that we could highlight around the High Holy Days, around fragility and our mortality, our recognition of how fragile life is, which for some people this year might be a theme that needs really highlighting. So I think there are so many things. Those were just a few examples.
It's a wonderful suggestion. Let me go back to the main message, if I may, because main messages can get lost. The main message is, normally what we have done is we have simply done everything according to rote as usual. And we've asked, what do we do again? How do we do it? You know, let's make sure we get it right. Oh yeah, we add this prayer, we take that one out, we start a little early. We all know how that happens. That has been failing us actually for the last decade or 2 decades. We've just not admitted it. And the reason we don't admit it is that the regulars, that inner circle of people, that 10% love what we do. And since they love it and they're the people we see and we love it and we know how to do it, we just keep on doing it. But the fact is, at least in this country, the numbers are dwindling. And in fact, people are getting older and the young people are not coming. And so we should already have said, whatever we're doing, we're not doing it well. What's wrong with it? What I'm suggesting actually is what I think we should have been doing anyway. And it may be that out of this terrible, terrible moment in time, not that we wanted it, not that I wanted to have it in the first place, I wouldn't want to learn from it, but since I've already got it, I learned from it. Maybe this is the time that we can practice doing it differently by actually asking ourselves, what's the point of it all? And learning always to ask, what's the message? That's why what Sarah said before was so perfect. What's the message of Simchat Torah? She asks us. All right, then that's the message. Now you know whatever you're going to do is going to get across that message. If we learn to do that regularly, we can end up in a position of learning how to do tefillah differently all year round. And it will be remarkable how we touch people's hearts and souls differently.
Larry, thank you for that comment. And it reminds me that in many ways, one of the ironies of the high holidays, when we get most people into the building or into the community even, is that it is a time when we do the least creative things very often. of the whole year, when we're least expressive in our own free ways, are the high holidays. And what's the impression they get? Hasn't changed since last year. It's no different.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so we perpetuate this.
We do, Richard, we do. There's
So-
a general principle. I mean, you're absolutely right, Richard. There's a general principle, which is creativity varies inversely with pressure. And so since there's greater pressure on us on the high holy days, because all those people are coming, we drop the level of creativity. Then we finally get back to regular Shabbat, and all of a sudden we can do all kinds of things. So we have to be very careful about that. You're absolutely so right about that.
I think that's a really important message to emphasize for now as well, because I think so many of us are feeling the pressure of the greater technical demands of this time. We're stressed about how we're going to do it. So we really need to make sure we don't let creativity be the victim of the pressure that we might be feeling, and to really hold on to this message which Larry has given us, and the permission and freedom which Larry has given us to be more expansive about what what our communities need this year.
The consultant in me also says that as you make radical changes, you're going to want to alert certain people. You're going to have to work with people. You'll have to hold your ground, but you can tell people that you've been on this call. This is what everyone's doing around the country. We've all decided this is what's necessary. And so you want to draw people into the discussion of what matters to them. So you can have focus groups with maybe your board, or you don't call it a board there, do you? That's what we call it.
Or council.
Yeah, council, right? Yeah. So with your council, or you may want to just have just at random some of the very important people who come all the time, and just say, this is the policy and this is what we're thinking of doing. I once was asked to write 3 poems to introduce Kol Nidre. And before I did it, I said, I need to find out what Kol Nidre means to people. It's about what meaning. Now, meaning, there are different ways of meaning. The official meaning is whatever the rabbis and cantors in the world say things are. If we say it means it, then people take notes and that's what it means. I don't mean that by meaning. There's a public meaning. Public meaning is what people take away from something. And we need to understand what the public meaning is. So I simply had focus groups in the synagogue talk to me about Yom Kippur, what goes through their minds. I'm sorry, Kol Nidre. And you'd be amazed at what I learned. So, I think if you have these focus groups with people and say, talk to me about what Rosh Hashanah means to you. Talk to me about your favorite prayer. What goes to your mind with it? That'll help you decide what to include. It'll help you decide how to add something. When you introduce a prayer with that set induction that I talked about, those few lines, you'll borrow on what somebody says, because you'll say, I would never have thought of that myself. It'll be much richer if you become the voice of your community, and they'll really appreciate you're engaging them in the decisions, and they'll know that they've been listened to.
Thank you both. I want to share something that may be helpful for everyone who's on this call, which is some teaching about how we adapt to this different technology. And it talked about 4 levels of adaptation. The lowest level is substitution. And in substitution, you simply change the platform. Instead of being in the synagogue together, you move to Zoom or streaming or whatever it is, but you do the same thing. The second is augmentation. You realize that something a little bit extra is needed because of the new platform. But ultimately, you're still doing basically the same thing. Then you move up to the 3rd level, and what you do is you redefine and redesign what you're doing to make it fit the new platform. So we've talked about Zoom being better for intimacy. It's not great for transcendence. So don't try and do the transcendent bit. Don't go for the awe, but make the most of the intimacy. So how do you design in an intimate experience of high holidays? Maybe it's about going further inside for people than about being wowed. And so you redesign, you modify. Modification is the 3rd step. And the 4th step, and the highest step, is about redefinition. And that, I think, is where Larry and Sarah have been trying to take us this evening. Can we redefine what is our purpose this year of these high holidays in these unique circumstances where we're going to be using things that we never thought we'd use 6 months ago to lead our high holiday services? And so if we can take ourselves up that ladder and see those possibilities, then what we can do is give a wow, which is a wow of they've really embraced this technology, they really own this change, and as a community, our leaders are leading us through this in ways we never thought, expected in our wildest dreams that these people were capable of doing. And that can also be the high of the high holidays. So with that, I want to say, I know we may not have been to every single question that whizzed through the chat, and I apologize if anyone feels they've missed out. If there are burning questions you haven't asked, then maybe what you could do is send them to me or to Sarita, and we will look to make sure that they get put to either Larry or Sarah, and we'll come back to you with answers subsequently. But for now, I'm going to say on behalf of all of you, a very big thank you to Larry for giving us this time out of his afternoon in New York to come and inspire us all, to Sarah for giving such interesting and wonderful takes on what are the key questions we in our communities need to be asking ourselves. And I want to say to all of you, thank you for the comments and the teachings you've been putting into the chat and been enabling us to discuss with you all. And we so appreciate it. Sarah, I can see you've got your guitar back out, and we have to bracket and bookend with something to send everyone away with a bit of singing. But thank you all. Good night. Thank you, Sarita, for organizing and arranging everything. And thank you, everybody, for your attendance right through till just after 9:10 in the evening here. It's been great to have you all with us.
Erev Tov, everybody, and chazak chazak, as Larry said to us.
Erev Tov, thank you all so much, and have a good evening, and I wish you well in the build up to these very special Chagim. Thank you all.